Hey everybody, welcome back to the Nyedis Anarchy series. I'm your host, Adam, the CIO of Nyedis, and today is going to be a fun one. We have a whole bunch of the smartest people in identity and access management today. We got Ian Glazer, Mike Neuenschwander, Gerry Gebel. Thank you for coming and joining us on this awesome panel of previous Burton Group guys that really founded identity and access to where we are going today, and the thought leaders from before that have kind of shaped how identity and access management, I think, in most enterprises is being done today. And I think that's even an understatement. I remember, Mike, I remember working with you, and the first time I saw your name was actually before you even, I think you even talked with John at Mycroft, and I remember reading some of the writings that you were doing when you were at Burton and stuff, and I was following you incessantly, and with pretty much every word you wrote, I was like, okay, this is how we have to do things. And then when I found out, I was like, oh man, he's going to be coming over here to Mycroft. I was like, this is going to be great. And then I left. So, and then, Gerry, we had a brief stint even before Strata. And then we just had the podcast with the lock picking that you guys did. I had a ton of fun on that. So I'm glad we got to do a little bit more of this fun stuff. Ted, obviously, you know everyone as well. So why don't you kind of talk a little bit more about your background here?
So yeah, I mean, I've been doing identity since, gosh, 2002, 2003. I think the first person out of this group I ran into was Ian back in the Access 360 days and things along those lines. Then ran into Mike at the conferences and Gerry as well. And yeah, kind of been running into these guys at conferences and all over the place ever since.
Yep. And so, Mike, since I've kind of like talked to you up the most, why don't we start out with you and kind of give us a little intro on you?
Well, you've done most of it already. I obviously, my career in identity began at Novell. Did as a product manager for the eDirectory, and also for a thing that we at the time called DirectXML, which is essentially MetaDirectory, and had a lot of success with those. And I got to know Jamie Lewis through that, and at some point, I asked him if he was looking for analysts, and he said, "Okay, yeah, let me get back to you," and he did. So I spent 8 years at Burton Group, and it was a lot of fun. And the people that were all there, the whole team, the people that were associated with the conferences, and it was just a really good time to be part of that industry. This industry really now. A lot of momentous things were happening, a lot of big names. So since then, yeah, I just bounced around doing some consulting, as you know, with Mycroft originally, and then Accenture and a few other places, and done a little bit more product management at Oracle and other places. So it's good. I'm back now as an analyst with KuppingerCole, and it's work that I really enjoy. So you can start reading again.
Nice. Back to the roots. So this is great. Now people ask me questions, I can just regurgitate what you say. It's way easier than having to think.
All right. I'll put a few jokes in there for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Gerry knows about that too. We used to kind of, since we all had to edit and review each other's documents, we had these kind of inside jokes sometimes where we would drop things in there.
Easter eggs. Easter eggs
yeah. To make the editing go a little easier, a little more fun.
Yeah, I used to do that on servers, and I found out later it's not a good idea.
I don't know, Gerry, you want to say about that? Or?
Yeah, I guess my connection with Burton Group was a little bit different, although it was also through meeting Jamie Lewis. So I was working at Chemical Bank at the time, and we were hosting these security seminars, one-day seminars. And some folks knew Burton Group people. And so one time we had Jamie do a presentation. I think Larry Gautier from the Wayback Machine, Phil Schachter came by. So that was my original connection. And then started there as a consultant, moved over to the analyst team. And I mean, what I remember mostly is the incredibly intellectually stimulating environment. Working with all these smart people was really life-changing in that way. And then I was there a little longer than Mike, and moved over to the software side with Axiomatics for a while, and now over at Strata. So stayed over on the vendor side. But
What
one
were
thing
you
to
doing
clear
at
up.
Burton while you were there?
Sorry?
What
Yep.
were you doing at Burton while you were there?
Well, I had to manage these other two people, so you should feel a little bit sorry for me. But yeah, I was a consultant, an analyst, and then what we call the service director, so managing the identity research team.
Nice.
And we should point out, though, that while I worked with Mike and I worked with Ian, the two of them never worked together. So there's some kind of Venn we need here to represent this.
Was this on purpose because you knew what would happen?
Leave the restraining order aside. Yeah, no, that wasn't. No, it was no, because Burton Group was like a sealed box. Like you couldn't actually get into it. You had to wait for someone to leave before you could somehow sneak in while the door was open like a few millimeters. And then so that's how I got involved. Is that Mike left, and because in back when I was aware of Burton, I was nowhere near in a class to be in the same room with Jamie Lewis. So I was just sort of like around the corner listening to other people. And so at some point, oh no, I know what that point is. There might have been drinking involved. I was like, Gerry, you should, if you're ever hiring, maybe, what do you think?
We should talk. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, this was done after having actually met Gerry in person for, I don't know, all of 24 hours. Fortune favors the brave. And then like literally years later, there was an opening, and one of the other clown jesters of the organization, one Mr. Bob Blakely, called me and just said like, okay, well, you better come on board this year, maybe next summer at the latest, but otherwise I'm just going to put out of business any startup you go to next. I was like, it's a different kind of job offer. Let's put it that way. And that's how I came on board.
Nice. And what were you doing? The same thing as Mike with the documentation and documentation?
I was writing.
That's
we were all
word.
like publish or perish, right? 2-term papers a quarter. Gerry was trying to make sure that I wasn't getting other people's bad habits in writing. For example, I did have a nasty habit of delivering couple weeks before the deadline, and there were others that were like, you got to stop that. You got to stop that.
You're messing up the bell curve.
No. Don't corrupt him. Yeah. And then I was on those teams. And then when Gerry moved on, I was of this group, the sort of the last person holding the baton, and made our way into Gartner. And I did more time actually in Gartner than at Burton Group, to the tune of like 4 years in Gartner, about 1.5 years-ish. At Burton Group.
Nice. Which one did you have more fun at?
Redacted.
That's not
even a question. I mean, to be fair, yeah, no, there were people painted blue in booths at one of them. The other,
not so much paint involved.
Not that much.
Yeah. See, that's the kind of thing that I noticed. Like the common theme was like, man, that was the fun times back then. And from the consulting side, I completely agree with you. Back like the early 2000s, mid 2000s, man, it was like a party. Like it was fun to be a traveling identity management consultant, which sounds bizarre, and I kind of want to punch myself for it's like, what? How could this possibly be fun? But back then, it was just, man, I don't know. Everyone's just having a really good time. Like everyone seemed to be like, what was some of the fun stuff you guys were doing when you were at Burton? Besides painting people blue and duct taping them to walls or something.
Well, we always did. Well, I guess I sort of started it because I remember the first Catalyst conference I went to as an analyst. And I remember sitting there being kind of bored, and it was all very good, deep content, but it was somewhat cryptic and kind of academic and things like that. And Jamie Lewis and team, they basically had a format and Dan Bloom and others, where they wanted it to be a little bit dry, a lot of text on slides and things like that, because they wanted it to feel very not academic. What would you say? Like
serious. They wanted it to be serious content. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, but I noticed that, and it was serious content, and but I noticed that, people had been traveling to the conference and stuff, and I'd look around and somebody's nodding off over there, and it got a little tedious, So the next conference, I decided to surprise people by adding some things like jokes and stuff. but I never would tell Jamie in advance what I was going to do because I figured he would tell me not to. So I asked forgiveness later, and every year it just kept getting bigger and bigger. Ended up smashing a guitar with Pam Dingle, and that
I
was
was
fun.
awesome.
I was gonna say I recall somebody smashing a guitar on stage at one point.
I smashed a cell phone the day before. I thought it was a deprovisioning exercise. I thought that would be kind of a sort of a rock star version of an analyst.
Drop in the mic, so to
I
speak.
mean, yeah, right. Like, so Mike is smashing guitars on stage and all this cool stuff. And literally, my introduction to the audience was I was brought on stage with a bag on my head. I mean, like, so there's just a pretty wide spectrum of the ways you were introduced to the Burton audience,
The
depending on
Anonymizer 2000, wasn't that it?
Anonymizer 2000.
Yeah, it's man, we sold a lot of those. I was always hoping that we would, if we'd thought of this in advance, we could have sold it like swag out front of the conference.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Another fun thing we did was schedule Catalyst during Oktoberfest in Munich.
Mhm.
Oh, nice.
That was interesting and challenging in different ways.
Did you have to have extra like urinals around for the conference?
No, I would say we need to have extra migraine medication available.
Oh, day after. Gotcha.
Hangover solutions, yeah.
That's cool. So that's one thing too. Is this being an analyst for Burton, Gartner, KuppingerCole? Like, it's brought you all around the world, right? I mean, every time I see you guys, you're in a different country. It seems almost like every quarter you're somewhere else, or even more. What are some of the places that you guys have gone and it's been, you've seen over the time that this whole kind of role has brought you into?
Yeah, join an analyst firm and see the world, right? I think for Burton Group, we were North America focused when I started, and then broke into Europe with the Catalyst and so on. But I think with Gartner, Ian, you guys truly span the globe, right?
A little bit more, but I mean, zooming out a little bit, I mean, as an identity practitioner, like truly, I have seen the world as an identity practitioner, in the various phases of my career, which I'm deeply, deeply, deeply grateful for. But yeah, like it was the Gartner days, like that brought us a little further afield. So I went to Tokyo a couple times, and people were going to South America and South Africa, but yeah, it was. I joined about the time that this is actually interesting. It's from the Icelandic volcano, the E15 volcano had just gone off, and that had forced us to postpone Catalyst Europe. We were supposed to be going to Prague, and there was just no way to fly to Europe from the West. So we had to postpone. And then right about then, I think it was right about then, Gartner bought us. And so it's just odd to know, like right now, people are like, well, I think that volcano is about to explode again. I'm like, well, there's no identity conference scheduled right now. How? No, you volcanists are completely wrong. It's not going to be a volcano. There's no catalyst. Can't be.
Okay, so I need to time volcanic explosions with the right timing of an investment into something that's about to be bought, is what I'm hearing. Okay, got it. I'll write that down. What would you say are some of the predictions that you guys kind of harped on back in like the early days of Burton that you've seen come to fruition, or even more so? Was there anything that comes to mind at all? Mike, I'm going to start with you because you're the one that did this a lot.
Well, I think that there are lots of predictions that we were right about everything pretty much. But I think a lot of it had, a lot of things that are changing that we saw coming had to do with, first of all, mergers and acquisitions. There are a lot of companies whose names nobody would recognize anymore, that were pretty big deals. I mean, Access 360 was out there, right? And there were quite a few of those that we knew those teams really well, but the market was just forming differently around them, and most of them did get acquired at some point, and they founded the basis for a lot of technology at Oracle, for example, or at Broadcom, and so I'd say that those are the kinds of predictions that they're not pie in the sky per se, right? But they shape the industry, I think, pretty significantly. The other thing is, of course, is that people claim that I killed LDAP, and I'm like, well,
It's alive and well. Yeah.
it's still out there, but certainly it's not. LDAP isn't really the central, the core feature of identity, and hasn't been for a while. There's so many other things surrounding it now. So I don't know. There's a couple of things to think about there. I don't know. Maybe I'll think of a couple more that are fun, but yeah, I think we were there. The trends ended up not being. We created a thing called the limited liability persona, for example. I'm only now seeing that start to be a real thing with AI coming out,
Okay.
with agents and that sort of thing. You can really have a persona that works on your behalf. And
You associate that with the self-sovereign movement, Mike, or something
it's
different?
related, yeah, but it really is coming out of OpenAI and Microsoft right now. That they have a very specific approach to that. It's different from.
Well, and now it looks like Microsoft just got Steve Altman plus a bunch of the OpenAI guys.
I don't know.
Did they or not? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
It's a moment by moment thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard they wanted him back, but I didn't hear that he was going back yet.
That's possible.
To be determined. So, Mike, I think if limited liability personas were based either on blockchain or OpenAI, they might have taken off.
I think so. Yeah. Blockchain is definitely a part of kind of the ecosystem we envisioned. That is something that is kind of interesting about Burton Group, is that we were introducing new ideas for identity and not just reacting to sort of the direction a vendor would always want to go. So it wasn't just reporting on kind of the innovation all happens with the vendors. We would bring people to conferences and talk about and even things like SAML at the time. Remember, there were some big wars over that, and Microsoft didn't want to do it and everything. So we would I think we were sort of agents of change to get consensus in the marketplace, and that's not. We were just doing it. I don't know that it's really that common of a thing, generally speaking, with analyst firms. But
yeah, definitely. And Ian, well, from your, I mean, you obviously Burton for a little bit, but then Gartner even longer. So at the Burton side, would you kind of go off what Mike was saying, in the sense that with Burton you had a little more freedom to talk about where you think the industry is going from more of a holistic approach, where it says vendor, like we're talking about this vendor and here's where they score and all that kind of stuff? Or
I'd say it a little bit differently, which is at the time there was an interesting balance between wanting to write and push the boundaries, write about and push the boundaries of where market is and where we felt like, with a strongly expressed opinion, where it should be going and why. Right. So there was always that positive tension, let's say. But then there was always, and this maybe got more amplified during the Gartner acquisition, was the need to recognize that where we as analysts were sitting and thinking was 5-10 years ahead of where things are, and that there's a whole part of the market that is 5 and 10 years behind sort of now. Mm-hmm. And that we had to bring those people along in the journey. And so that healthy tension between, I want to write about not even the new shiny stuff, but like the not even imagined stuff, and the sort of meat and potatoes, as I called it when I was a research director, of like, hey, we got to bring people along on the basics, because what we think are the basics are by no means basic, right? And so I actually enjoyed that a lot. And like I say, that may have been of a time, right? I've been out of Gartner now 10 years. And so I think a lot changes in terms of as businesses grow and change and get acquired. But the need to make sure that there was something tangible, because if you're just out spouting pronouncements, mm-hmm. it's depending on your batting average, you're either a weatherman, economist, or just the crazy person at Speaker's Corner. But I think that was the powerful thing about Burton Group, was also the pragmatic sort of like, this is how you can do X, right? And not imagine and invent a spaceship that can travel faster than light. There was a lot of pragmatism, although sometimes hiding under 50 and 60,000 words. There was a lot of pragmatism in what was going on. And that's important, right? Because otherwise you are just sort of like, a pundit versus actually a participant in a market. And we all thought we were participating in a market. And I think that's foundationally different than many other analyst firms' approach. I don't know today, but certainly back in the day, they were much more observe and report versus actually participating.
All right, cool. So, Gerry, would you say that there's been any surprises, like from when you're at Burton to now, like, I don't know, the Oracle Sun buyout, or just CA kind of dropping SiteMinder, not really doing anything, well, not even CA anymore? Is there anything where just like today you're like, man, I totally didn't see that coming, or I totally thought this would be happening, just from your experience?
Well, it has been interesting to see how, some vendors like Oracle made such a huge investment in identity and then sort of went where? I don't know. And similar with IBM, although I think they claim to be on some Magic Quadrant recently, but they were sort of under the radar. And then, companies like Okta moved to the forefront now, or now Ping and ForgeRock, depending on how things go with them, they're obviously a huge player now. Microsoft seems to have been the most consistent of the bigger players in sort of maintaining their level of involvement and leadership in this market. So I would say the biggest thing is how some of those large vendors that we were covering back during that time have sort of waned a little bit in their investment in this space.
Gerry, I mean, I remember this is one that from a workforce identity perspective, like there was a moment when the big ERP providers, the big HR providers were like, they're going to run the workforce identity world because they're best suited to know who you are, where you are, what you're doing, and control that all the way down through asset management, like give them a laptop, the whole 9 yards. And like, that was, remember, SAP was in the identity business in their own very Teutonic way. And like, there's a lot of opportunities squandered that we're now only seeing coming back in the form of companies like Rippling and others. So that one was like, oh my gosh, how did they not do that? Right. Like, and, that still kind of perplexes me, but damn, did it happen? Right. Or I guess didn't happen is the case.
Right.
Well, that is a really interesting point of view. I think that I was working at Oracle when the Sun acquisition, I think it was right during that time anyway. So that did surprise me, I have to say. I didn't really see that one coming. Maybe neither did Jonathan Schwartz. But anyway, but the thing is that I do know from working at that time, like Thomas Korean, of course, was running that whole outfit there, and was much more interested at that time in cloud, even though there's like $500 million of revenue or something coming from the collection of the identity products. It wasn't as cool, neat, and futuristic as cloud, in a way. And so, at least in the case of Oracle, the business continued to do what it was doing, that is the identity business, but it wasn't really getting the same level of attention and love, right, from the senior management. And I don't know if that's true as well of late. I remember Siemens being a big deal for a while, but it just seems like at some point, even though they're doing very well in the market in their own right, it just seems like for some reason the management, that like Oracle was never going to be an identity company per se, right?
Yeah.
This is just something they do on the side, no matter how big it is. So I don't know, maybe that's what happened to all of them.
Cool.
I didn't really see Broadcom getting into it in a big way like they are now. That's sort of...
Yeah, that one caught me off guard for sure. So these reports that you guys put together, I mean, they're massively informational, and I would say hugely helpful and decisive for a lot of companies on decisions that they make, these multi-million-dollar decisions and massive timelines that are changed based on just these words that you write about the products or the industry and the space that we're in. What's kind of the process of how that kind of starts from, hey, do you bring up like, hey, I want to write about such and such product or vendor, or is it kind of assigned to you? And has it been different between Burton, Gartner, and Kuppinger? How's that kind of evolved over time?
Yeah, I don't know about Gartner or Kuppinger, but with Burton Group, we sort of had a to-do list, of topics we always had on the back burner. And then I think a lot of it revolved around planning for Catalyst. That was the main event for us. So when we did our planning sessions, I remember thinking about, okay, what topics did we want to have on stage? So we got to do the right research, whether that's just plain research or reports or what have you. So I remember that being the big focus, revolving the content planning around the Catalyst event.
Now, when you did that content planning, did you guys set forth and say, okay, we've got to generate, 20,000 words about this particular subject? Did you have specific targets like that? Or was it based on subject? Or, what were the limitations around it?
Well, I guess we didn't want to always generate, 100-page reports, but it was, whatever it took to cover the topic from the angles that we wanted to cover. Or, sometimes when you propose that you want to, to talk about a subject, where you end up may be different from where you thought you were at the start. So we didn't have those sort of word count or page count limitations.
I think that Jamie Lewis was very inspirational when it came to that sort of thing. He would not only he would ask some hard questions, right? Like, really, you're going to talk about that, or what you really think this is what was going to, he would be in there kind of pushing the team, but he wouldn't dictate the stuff to us, right? He wouldn't do that. But he was his presence was definitely, as we met and did and tried to do research planning. Those were always fun. We used to joke about maybe we should put it on TV. It was I found it entertaining, but maybe someone else would. It's like Housewives.
Well, but I mean, that was the balance. Like, Mike, you were in that position, and I was in the position of being, the person that was overseeing the overall agenda for a practice area or research for a practice area. And so there were topics that analysts, they were their pets, and they just—
That's true. Yeah, that's really true.
Pets, and include pictures of their pets in talks about their pets. And at some point you're like, certainly in Gartner, someone in Burton, like, guys, it's a fascinating topic and you could go deep here, but it's like an audience of 12.
Weirdly, one of those was Ann Thomas Maines was so convinced that WS Trust and web services would be the future, and a year or two later, UDDI, remember all that stuff?
Oh yeah.
People get passionate about that, though. It's
sure. But I mean,
were there topics that people didn't want to cover, and my memory is sort of—
Oh yeah,
Try assigning Bob Blakely a user provisioning report. You tell me how that goes, right? It's like you running out of the room where you're like, no, dude, who's gonna? Ah, crap, I'm doing it, aren't I? Damn it! Like.
Gotta know how that game.
Definitely were topics people were like, "Aw."
Yeah, one of the things we really had a lot of really great end user customers, and they enjoyed talking to us all the time. And so I did a couple of reports. One that I remember was on federation, and I literally went and did interviews with at least 40 of our enterprise customers, and some in person. And was surprised to find out that even though there were so many good ideas put in the SAML, spec, it was only browser redirect that was ever going to get used, and that's all that's done today. There was all kinds of backdoor things that they figured out, like the artifact profile and this and that and the other. But nobody, because of the way the firewalls work and stuff like that, nobody was going to do this. And so this somehow was a revelation, to the industry. I think I was talking to Andre Durand about it. because they were trying to implement, you know, all of the SAML spec. And I'm like, don't waste your time, right? It's not gonna, no one's gonna use it. Okay.
That's interesting. You guys kind of helped write the spec with some of these things. You laid out some groundwork. How often, and without mentioning any customers' names or product names or anything like that, how often were there rebuttals that were coming back telling you guys you were wrong, or, you know, your approach was incorrect? And, you know, particularly while you were looking at, you know, making commentary on different products' capabilities, how much came back your way as far as negativity or questioning what you were putting out there?
It happened. It wasn't really personal or directed at anybody, I don't think. I feel like we had, like the people that we worked with, like the vendors and stuff, they knew us and we had working relationships with them. And they found us to be reasonable people, believe it or not. But I remember Microsoft coming back a few times complaining about some things, and Jamie Lewis was great. He's like, well, you decide, you know, it's your call, right? And so I don't know, Gerry, you might know more about that than I do, but
No, not that particular incident, but I know, I don't remember details, but yeah, there could be some blowback when vendors got a draft of their section, you know, of an upcoming report. Certainly there could be some of that as well at a Catalyst event. I felt that a few times.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was, like Mike said, we did have a good relationship with most vendors, and they realized they needed to tell us more information. You know, we weren't just a fly-by-night kind of reporter. We really wanted to understand what they were doing, why they were doing it, where they were going. And so if they, you know, were open with us, then we could have a more authentic or appropriate assessment of what they were doing and compare it more in a more informed way against others. So, but yeah, it happened from time to time.
So I think that happened more around the standards efforts that were happening at the time, because
yeah, not so much. I mean,
you don't think so?
No, at least it wasn't my experience anyway.
No, that's good.
So when you're writing these reports, how much of it is from working with the vendor, the product development team, versus the client and hands-on with the product? You know, basically, the sales team says it does X, hands-on it doesn't do that at all. Like, how do you kind of find where do you work in that gray room where the vendor says we do it, but the end user says it doesn't work?
I mean, some of it was go talk to their clients, like go talk to their customers. And what you would hear is like, oh, that? Yeah. So you're like, oh, cool. Could you show me? And they're like, yeah, check this out. And then sometimes we had hands-on keyboards, right? We had hands-on product, which was always fun. Like, can I actually go log in and do this? You know, just sort of fact checking what was claimed with like, oftentimes like, show me the documentation, this is actually viable. And then you'd still squirrel that away to go talk to a customer and be like, does this actually do that? Yeah. But like, one of the things that I think made us unique was we were very comfortable going from hands-on product through, well, it's great you tell me, but I'm going to go talk to your customers too. I'm going to go talk to people that maybe are customers, but you didn't send my way for this conversation to, here's what the universe is going to be like in 10 years, right? And we were super comfortable anywhere along that sort of spectrum of data gathering and sort of conclusion drawing exercises. And that's different. We were also afforded that time, right? We were afforded the time to write two really weighty things. And often one of those was an update. You know, it wasn't necessarily two net new earth-shattering things every quarter, but we were given the time to spend the time. And there's a lot that can be taken from that. There's also some really interesting observations about how do you scale that? How do you reach a larger audience in a more meaningful way? How do you know, not everything can be a custom 300 slide deck, oddly enough. I know it still comes as a great shock to me about that. But like, yeah, there was a lot of lessons in that too.
You know, you mentioned the time it takes, and I can't remember who came up with it, but I remember Dan Bloom and Jamie Lewis always talking about how you spend 3 months worrying about writing a report, and then you spend like 2 days writing it at the very end of the quarter, because we had quarterly goals, right? So you'd sit there and ruminate on it and you'd be gee, what's going to come out, and then
Well,
literally all the writing happened at the last week.
yeah, well, to Ian's point, some of us were pretty good at getting a draft in early. I think for the most part, it was that late quarter stream of consciousness that said, okay, I got to get this on paper now and just crank it out.
And there was the whole notion of the golden dump truck. So you've got all of these slackers in the company, right? Like super big brains, not so much good on time management. And so it's like 13 hours to go in the quarter, and your bonus and your team's bonus is all tied to whether you ship this MFer. And meanwhile, on the receiving end of this, it wasn't like it goes straight from Gerry's keyboard to the internet. It goes through this tranche of editors. So like Leslie and the team who had to do the yeoman's work of making whatever fever dream dropped out of my brain into something that was actually like understandable. Like they had the absolute worst time because the entire company would show up with one, if not two reports each, with like 12 hours left in the deadline to hit the publish button. That's the golden dump truck.
Yeah, I must say I learned more about English composition from our editors than I ever learned in school. It was amazing.
We had good editors. Yeah.
Did you ever have to translate these into other languages?
I don't think so. Maybe a Gartner. Does Gartner do that?
I don't remember, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm sure there's probably some translation to Japanese or what have you. But then like, okay, so fine, you get the report in. Editors do a pass. Then there's all the feedback loop, right? Which is basically like Analyst Thunderdome, where it's like, hey, that's the fastest. I remember so distinctly my first report, an analyst whose name will not be mentioned because this person is still active in the industry and works at Gartner, commented on like a whole paragraph or page and said, I wouldn't have raised it this way. I went to my research director at the time and I went, I don't know what to do with this comment. And he looked at it, he goes, well, consider a compliment and don't change anything. I'm like, oh, okay. It got tough in those reviews.
Well, I don't think you had this experience, Ian, but Mike and I surely did. So if James Kabilas was one of your reviewers, you could pretty much count on him rewriting pretty much the whole document. And as a bonus, he would include a chapter from the latest book he was working on.
Yeah, that guy was like ChatGPT before his time.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, the review process was pretty brutal.
Do you see AI either? I'm not going to the whole. Is it going to take your job? Is it going to do the work for you? Because I don't think we're ever going to get to that point. But how do you see AI, generative AI or general AI, in assisting in the development of these reports for the research? And like, do you see it as like a time savings or a handicap crutch?
I guess that's for you, Mike. You're the one still in the business here.
That's right. You guys don't even do this anymore.
We're has-beens. You're active.
I am pretty impressed with how well LLMs can write, and how well they can translate to other languages, and so quickly. One thing I've noticed about they train the model, of course, it's always a bit historical. I think we're up to April now, something like that. But they've added some ability for it to go out and search the web and get some real-time things. But I find that really the way that LLMs work, you train the model, and then that's like it learns to speak and reason, right? But it's not a database. It's not a Google index, okay? And so what happens is, if you treat an LLM like I'm going to go look something up, like you would on Google, it's like I'm going to go find a reference for this thing, okay? ChatGPT, for example, isn't as good at that and not as reliable for sure, because it's just it just has a statistical analysis of the language as it was. Yep. So you need to, if you feed it proper prompts, if you know what you're doing and you can provide recent information and good information, you say this is the solid canon here. This is the thing that's really important to keep true, right? And then you have ChatGPT absorb that prompt and do something with that, right? Then I think you're in a pretty good place for writing, but it's not really in a place at the moment, the way AI is developed, that it will just become an analyst by itself, right? It's not really happening.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I just a little while ago, I used it to scour through NIST standards because someone asked me like, hey, where in all of the NIST documents does it talk about these particular items? I'm like, oh man. So I threw it into ChatGPT. I'm like, let's see what it gives me. Maybe it'll give me like a pointer, like which documents to start at. And it gave me titles, sections, the numbering, and everything. Like, oh, this is great. So then I go to look it up to actually read the information to get the full, and it's all wrong. Like the headings are wrong, the numbers are wrong, everything about it is completely wrong. And I was like, okay,
that's
I couldn't even find where it got the info.
It will always give you an answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you say like, oh, this isn't right. They're like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to do something. It's like, what? Yeah. What is actually happening behind the scenes when it says I forgot about this?
Yeah.
Well, but Mike, we also know some real life analysts that will always give you an answer.
Yeah, that's true.
It's an answer.
It's just a better one.
That is the answer.
Yeah.
So how often can you give a solid yes, this is absolute versus, well, it varies, it depends on the client, like a lawyer answer?
I think it's like does standard do X?
Okay.
And, if it's a straight down the middle use case, sure, you can answer one way or another. But more often than not, you got questions of how are people using this standard in this market, right? Like, so the one was like, how are people using artifact binding? I remember getting that question when I was on site at SAP, and I'm like, they're not really, other than like a couple of governments. They really didn't like that answer. I'm like, okay, well, you can choose not to ask again, but like, there you go. So clear yes or no? No, that did not happen very often.
Yeah.
Shibboleth was like that too, because the universities really loved that, but it was such a niche area of the market. It's still being used as far as I know. Mm-hmm. Well, now it's SAML, so I guess it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's still run into it out there though. All right, guys, what about some predictions? Okay, you guys have been around for a long time. You've seen this market go in a lot of different directions. Where are we going from here? Silence, huh?
Tune in next week.
Exactly.
Now, where do you see it really? Seriously, where do you see things evolving? Do you see it going down the blockchain path, identity going down the blockchain path? Obviously, self-sovereign ID is going to play a part in the future. To what degree in the U.S. we'll see, but, really love to hear your input.
I mean, hopefully we get out of talking about the plumbing and the tools and start talking about how the tools actually do things, solve real problems. Because a lot of the early years in identity were very much plumbing obsessed. Whether it was protocols, whether it was implementation patterns, which were, constrained in different ways because of on-prem computing and those other things. Like, there's a lot of like plumbing. And I just wrote about this actually. And an industry luminary, Pam Dingle, once said, like, look, we have just now started to get enough tools where we can solve problems, right? We've built the tooling we need to actually go do stuff now. And I really hope that's true, because, like, giving you an example, I was talking about this concept of identity relationship metadata and management, and just talking about how, among other things, an implementation would be a graph database is a really interesting way to store information about relationship between entities and all these other things that you could do. And people sort of took that and ran with, like, graph databases are the identity future. I'm like, I don't care. I really don't care what your backend is implemented in. It's more about what can this sort of concept do? I don't care about the implementation details. It's actually moot. So I really hope from the industry's own perspective, and I think this is happening, because identity is becoming more mainstream in a lot of ways, that we're moving from tools and plumbing to actually problem solving and actually delivering value versus being so obsessed with how the sausage gets made.
I don't know. I become more of a skeptic in my old age, and I
More
still
of one? Holy
Oh,
crap, Gerry, what's
yeah.
that? Like,
But I think we're still obsessed with some of the tooling, certainly when it comes to verified credentials and
sure.
digital wallets and decentralized ID. And Adam, you and I talked about this on our recent podcast a little bit. I'm not sure that we're thinking through all of the potential negative side effects, or at least not positive side effects. I think we, beat the drum of, hey, better privacy, hey, limited disclosure of data, and yes, there is that, but I'm not sure if that. I know that's not the whole story. So I think we're still obsessed about the technology in many ways, and we're not telling the full. Okay, these are the good things that can happen, but these are also where it could go a little bit sideways, and we need to be aware of that. And without that open conversation, we're just, blundering straight ahead into some unknown result.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned wallets, for example, and it's funny because I was at a conference where they were talking about wallets a lot, and well, IIW. So you were there, Gerry, and
Yeah.
and Ian wasn't. I think so. You were doing so. You were speaking, I think, in Washington D.C. That
I was.
Yeah. So, but the thing is that that's not really a new idea. I mean, it feels like we
Control card.
yeah. We keep it's like we're so fascinated by identification, right? ID cards and things like this, and it's not really that. I think you need to frame the problem a little differently. Like Ian mentioned, relationships, for example, and how do you build trust into relationships, right? Yeah, I guess some of it, I suppose, an ID is important for that. But I don't understand the fixation on this tired idea in a way, right? Like we need a couple of good new ideas, a fresh approach to understanding how to improve trust. We especially need it now with AI bots out there doing whatever they want.
True.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, if we don't
where
get
do you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if we don't get to recognition over this authentication thing, like we're never really gonna progress to something more useful. Like we're so wrapped around the authentication axle, and we're so not making the kinds of progress we need to from a recognition perspective. Because once you get into whatever you want to call them, I refer to them as counselors or smart agents or what have you, like that they are recognized as acting on my behalf by other services, and that can actually be proved potentially cryptographically. Hey, fantastic. But like, as opposed to, oh no, this thing is actually just going to replay my password into a field and then screen scrape. Like, we got to get out of that. We got to move towards recognition a lot faster.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going to ask was, where do you see the gaps right now in the industry where either a product could fill or a standard could fill?
So here's a funny thing. Not answering the question, where's it going? Like there are still so many of these, like we have some of the tools, but not all the tools. Here's a good example. Someone asked me last week, is there a good standard for representing groups and their entitlements in a way that could be universally looked up and referred to? And I'm like, kind of skim-ish. But this is something that goes all the way back to like SPML days that still doesn't really exist in its own way, right? It's implied in provisioning standards, for example. Like there's some funny gaps where you're like, maybe we should go fill like these obvious potholes in because it might unlock some things. And then at the same time, there's like, everyone's standards are awesome. That's why everyone has one. And, we see this sort of playing out in credential formats and some of these other things that like, gosh, I wish we'd gotten a round wheel, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, I've been doing some standards work in authorization for the last little while, starting with, the IDQL format and hex open source, but now we're part of a group that started a new working group over at OpenID Foundation called AuthZen. And, we've got a bunch of authorization products out there that are quite similar in many ways, but don't interoperate at all with each other. So we're looking to fill some of those gaps, some of those seams, and can we improve interoperability and increase adoption in the industry? So that's brand new work that's just getting going. So I'm pretty excited to be part of that.
What would you say? So it's gonna be. We'll do like one of each. What would you say would be one thing that an enterprise could do, just in their identity access landscape as a whole, that would make their lives a million times easier than just what people generally do now? I mean, I have my own obvious personal ideas, but I would like to hear more about what do you think they could do to be like, hey, look, if you did this one thing, life becomes easier because of all these other options kind of line up.
Aside from hiring Nyedis, that is. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I don't know, Mike, what are you advising clients to do these days?
Well, it's what Ian was saying earlier is that we have clients. I mean, it's that 10 years ahead and 10 years look behind, and we sort of need to cover really all of those things. And because the good news is that there are, at least for the 10 years behind look back, there are some very solid things that you can do that we know work, right, and what to avoid. So, but looking ahead a little bit, I think that it's so spread out. Identities become so distributed that when companies are trying to get, for example, workers from another company who were trained by another company, into their facility, and they want to do that in real time at a massive scale, right? So in other words, somebody can show up to work on that day and you didn't pre-provision anything, but the trust mechanism works out really well so that you don't have to issue them that ID, and the authorization can come from another source, and all that just sort of meets up, dynamically. We need that still, and it's not something you can go out and buy right now. But I think that I've been encouraging people who are at the forefront of adoption of that technology, that type of technology, to attend things like IAW and to participate in bringing the use cases and helping engineers understand what it is they're trying to accomplish with these things. So I would say that if I had to shorten it down to something, I would say, get involved in those standards bodies and those conferences that are trying to get that stuff done and bring some kind of realism, some practical, real world use cases. That would be very helpful.
Okay. Gerry?
Yeah, while Mike was talking there, I was thinking of something that everybody has some kind of legacy tooling that they're still managing, and they want to migrate to something newer for whatever reason, cost, features, whatever the case might be. I don't think we plan enough thinking about, okay, I want to migrate to something X. Well, in 5 years or some number of years, I'm going to need to go from there to somewhere else. So can I do this? Can I make choices that give me flexibility in the future that maybe I don't have now? And that's sort of a broad statement, but I don't think we typically think about that as an industry. It's okay, here's my RFP. These are the things I need in this product I want to select. I don't know that there's enough vision to the future of, okay, I know at some point I'm going to need to migrate off this, because whatever technology I'm going to buy that's state of the art today will not be, in 5 years or thereabouts.
Yeah, and I think that's where, for me, that's why I keep recommending an orchestration layer to people nowadays. It's like, man, you need that just for to introduce a flexibility into your total infrastructure, so you can swap things in and out as things come, because it's going to change. So I'd have clients telling me, it's like, oh, no, there's one that we're buying now that we're switching from, that we've only been on for 3 years. This is gonna be the last time we're doing it. It's like, okay.
Lies we knew we were telling.
Ian, what do you think? Would you say from your standpoint?
Look, I'm gonna go super tactical, right? I'm gonna do like the absolute mom and apple pie on this one, which is like for workforce identity, deploy unphishable authentication. go do it. There's no reason not to. Go do it. And for your consumer facing, your citizen facing services, get ready to deploy passkey in late 24, early 25.
Okay.
Like do those things and drop SMS OTP like a hot potato. Like do the basics. That feels like the basics.
Okay, so for on the workforce side, any examples?
Any examples of like how to do it or who to do
No,
it
no, no,
with?
like product. So you're
Yeah,
saying
yeah, yeah.
you want
So,
to
like-
have like FIDO keys or like YubiKey type stuff. Like when you say anti-phishing authentication,
Yeah, so like you look at like unphishable, like doing FIDO keys, hardware keys, great,
Okay.
but there's a lot of pluses, there's a lot of minuses on the software
Yeah.
side. Passkey for enterprise, maybe not quite there yet from an assurance perspective because of a variety of reasons. There are vendor alternatives. For example, Beyond ID's got a really interesting solution to do some of the same things and also give you FIDO. I think the thing you got to be prepared for is that there will always be a use case you did not foresee when you started the program, no matter what it is, what kind of
That's
program it is. There's
absolutely
always going to
true.
be one, right? And so you've got to have and especially in workforce, well, sorry, no, I'm going to scratch that statement. It's regardless of workforce or consumer, is you've got to have the support and flexibility to actually meet that use case halfway, right? Meet whatever that is, whether it's third-party call center or it's a demographic that you thought you could reach with a kind of technology and realize actually what you selected was exclusionary. Passkeys right now are exclusionary. You need $1,000 supercomputer that fits in your pocket. So you've got to be really cognizant of that and have the support to meet whatever that use case is. Make motions towards it, but like know you're going to have something that's going to work, not for everyone, but for a lot of things, and then have to figure out the rest.
Cool. So on the opposite side, you mentioned about how we should be dropping SMS text duo codes like hot potato. So I'm going to take that as your answer, unless you want to rebut. But what would you say is one thing enterprises really got to get away from? Like really, it's like, look, we're done with this. There's better things now.
Automating provisioning everywhere all the time. I don't know. That's an old chestnut of a.
Okay,
Just
so you're more like ephemeral, like on demand. Is that what you're saying?
if you can JIT and have zero standing privilege, right? Like get away, like least privilege is actually, I think, something that's really kind of tired. I think we need to get to much more dynamic, like Mike was talking about. Like you have no privileges until you actually engage. And at that moment of engagement, then there's the right things sort of doled out at the right moment. We can move towards that versus say like, well, we have this account and it still can launch the missile, but we're going to watch when they log in. Like, how about an idea? How about no one can launch the missile at any time except at that moment of engagement. And there's all these conditions that are considered before that happens. That's a much better place to be. It's, again, to Mike's point, like, I don't think you can quite get there yet today, but you can see the outskirts of that. You can
Isn't policy-based access control really close to that?
Well, in some ways, but it's and it's not zero trust either. But it is. But I was thinking along the same lines, Ian. Yeah, we've been doing this provisioning, this account creation and mover, joiner, lever stuff for how many decades now? And is there an end state? I thought we were going to be finished with that by now. So I think, a different approach is really needed.
Definitely, Mike.
Well, remember before provisioning, everybody, well, at Netscape at least, they were, Tim Howe and team thought you could just put everything in a single directory, and then you wouldn't need to provision anything, right? You remember those days? And then that seemed
Laplace's demon of the universe, right? If it knows everything, then hey, the brain knows it. The end.
So I don't know. Maybe some LLM is going to learn everything for us, and we can we don't need the policy anymore. But I don't know. Short of that, Gerry, that's just the way we know how to do it. That's unfortunately the state of the art still.
Do you think this is a pure conspiracy tinfoil hat theory here, just coming up with right now, but do you think vendors are possibly not pushing towards the whole just-in-time ephemeral account creation on demand because they're charging based on the amount of users that are licensed into it, that are provisioned into it?
Well, the people doing the provisioning aren't the ones charging you for that seat.
Well, but the other thing, Mike, is that user provisioning is an administrative task.
Yeah.
Just-in-time access or zero, what is it? Zero standing privilege? I can never understand that new term, Ian. Is more of a runtime thing.
Yeah.
So for a company that's solely dedicated to administrative activities, that it's a big leap to get into the runtime game.
And I mean, maybe
No
that
doubt.
is one of the.
Oh yeah, I was just going to mention like where that gets a little bit weird too are things like audit, and where if you remember Sarbanes-Oxley came out and they said, well, I need to know the list of anybody who could potentially access this
Right.
thing, right? Which kind of flips it's not just who did, right?
Well, and that's one of the things that I worry about is that the auditors and regulation is actually sort of locking a certain worldview into the way we approach identity, because they're like, look, in this industry, I've got a clear auditor says I got to be taller than this bar. Okay. Like, what is it? Like, check. And the problem is that the way a regulation, the way an audit requirement changes over time is slower than the way a good practice evolves. That's the reality of it. And so we're stuck in this.
I don't know, like in Europe, there's a big thing going around about NIS2, right? I don't know if you've been following DORA or NIS2 or any of those. And the regulators are very serious about these, about putting these in place and ensuring that certain types of infrastructure, including banking, really follows a strict regimen for security. But they're sort of dictating at the same time then what that needs to look like, And if we do come up with a better idea that we can put into the market, it's not clear they can adopt that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So I wanted to ask this a little bit earlier. I totally forgot. When we were talking about the reports, you guys made all the different reports. Everything really leads up to whatever version of a Magic Quadrant that everyone wants to have and share and be in and talk about. So who makes that decision as to where that doc goes?
Wait a minute.
I was never involved in any of that. I was never involved in any of that. Like the special quadrilateral, pick your flavor and however you shape your quadrilateral, whatever agent, analyst firm you're at. Like certainly my time at Gartner, my teams weren't involved with that. We were involved in the requirements, right? Yeah. What were you going to be expected to demonstrate in what use cases? But placement, not my department.
Wow, that was so easy, Ian. I think we started a Magic Quadrant lookalike thing in the later days of Burton Group. I forget what we called it, market landscape maybe or something like that. And
did we have a quadrilateral? Like some sort of
yes,
everyone.
Yes, indeed.
Geometric shape.
Right there. I don't remember that.
And Lori won the prize, and she did the first one, so she should have been here to tell us how awful that was, or how that worked out. But I don't remember how we decided. I think she just said, based on my review, this is where I think, and I don't know that we moved things around at all. It's beyond my memory.
We probably would have argued 6 months over whether it should be a rhombus or like it would be that.
Yeah, I think she's still recovering.
Yeah, at Burton Group, it was more of an intellectual exercise, and we all had to sort of, come to some kind of consensus. In a way, I see the companies because I've been on the other side of that too, right? At Oracle and other places where we've filled out Magic Quadrant things or something, the Forrester Wave and all that, and so you get to look at like some of the questions that are asked on there. They can get very lengthy, right? Yeah. And I remember having a team of product managers, more than 5 people working on a Gartner response for like months. It's like, wow, because then you want to get everything right. And just so I think part of that is really for the ombudsman so that it's a CYA exercise, because now they have enough information on you to put you anywhere they want on the quadrant. And it's, and it's justifiable, right? We didn't really do it that way at Burton Group. We had to have very good rational arguments, and sometimes.
So when you're at Oracle and you had to do it you're on the other side of the fence now. How did you view that landscape? Were you like, oh, this makes total sense to me, everything is totally rational, and this is exactly how it should be? Or was there just, it was a whole different playing field that you didn't really expect?
Well, I think that people use quadrilaterals. I can barely say that. I think they use
Thanks,
those
Ian.
things really to prepare a short list. Okay, so a lot of times it's, you know, whether your dot is kind of there or kind of slightly over here, they just want to know that you know, for our customers, like it's like, oh, this is, they really are in this market. They really are, you know, you know, they're kind of in that one quadrant. But I don't think anybody's just going to pick the top dot and go buy that. You know, that's, I don't know anyone's done that.
I mean, sitting from the other side, like my data and vendors, like the other thing that was infuriating is like, I think Mike's spot on, right? People use those to form shortlists. But then when you see sort of like the market definition or the underlying assumptions about what is in this magical geometric shape report, you're like, wait a minute, you're framing this as what? Like, so for the longest time, I'll give you an example. Customer identity and access management was part of an overall access management magic quadrant. It might still be, I don't know. But like, so there's a bunch of questions that are much more germane towards workforce. And this is because an analyst had an opinion that says, oh, there should be a singular solution that should do all of these things, like the magic bacon animal for, you know, identity products. And so there's a lot of the like kind of, it's tough as an ex-analyst to fill out other analysts' sort of surveys and things like that, because you're constantly thinking about like, how's this being framed? What's the weighting criteria on this? Like, what? Oh, look, there's their pet standard that they really like. Like, you know, you can't. That monologue is really loud inside your own head.
Yeah,
Absolutely. That's so true, Ian.
that's awesome. All right, cool. Yeah, I was always curious because it's like, I mean, those magic quadrilateral images are so much of a pain because from a client's perspective, they're like, oh, well, we need to talk to the ones that are up here in this top right. And it's like, well, but these three aren't going to have anything to do with what you need to do. They will not help you.
Yeah.
Like, well, we need to talk to them anyway. It's like, okay. And then they'll find out later they didn't fit. But yeah, it's like, I definitely understand. Like, it's a great guide. Like, hey, look, real snapshot view. This is there. But a lot of people take it as religion. And I think they might take it a bit too far sometimes. Have you seen anyone like argue too much?
Well, I'm guessing that. So, Adam, you're talking about from my consulting days. Okay, I've been through a lot of purchasing processes. Okay,
Yes.
and as you know, every company kind of has a set of things that you're required to do. In some cases, you're required to produce something like a, you know, not to, from one or
and also some alternatives. Or
you know, so the documentation is there. Even if you don't intend to buy it. It's just,
yeah, it's just CYA. It's like, no, look, we checked these other ones out. Just happens to be the one we've been talking to for the last 3 years is the one we're going with.
Yeah.
Weird.
So do you guys, what would you say, like just as an overall, not client specific, do you say, you know what, you should buy the vendor and then buy the stack, or you should buy the product to meet the need? Don't say it depends per client.
That's the thing is like the purchasing processes that I've been involved in, it's complex and it involves teams of people from all like, and you know, finance has to approve it. You know, so to act like you're just gonna go shop for some cornflakes or something, that's not really how enterprises acquire technology.
No, but I mean, I think we've all seen it where a new CIO or something comes into play and they're like, we're now going all red, we're going all blue, we're going all whatever, because I know the guys there. That's what I knew at my last place, and they just lift and shift the whole thing out from underneath your feet right after the whole team got it implemented.
Yep. Yeah, I see that happening. So I don't know, what was the question then? Like, what are you?
I don't know. Just like, do you think like going like full product vendors, like saying, hey, look, if we're gonna go Oracle, just buy everything Oracle, even though there's other
well,
tools
not
that may be
everything
better.
Oracle is actually Oracle. That's part of the problem.
Well, anymore, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think probably fine tuning the question. You know, do you go for a point solution based on the problem you're faced, or do you look for a vendor that can provide most? You know, maybe 80%, 90%. Nobody can do 100%. But are you better off going, you know, with kind of that stack solution versus point solution based on the problem you're trying to resolve?
Best of breed, best of suite, the pendulum always swings. But here's the thing. I think like buying trends of services identity or not, that pendulum always moves, right? And we're in a world where, especially for shops that are more like to build versus buy, they're totally comfortable stitching together bunches of services from bunches of providers.
Yeah.
And so, I think that it matters the kind of consumer that's approaching that
That's good.
question,
Yeah.
let alone the dictate of the new CIO who wants to pound the table.
Yeah, plus there's so many open source options now in identity that it's not always about a vendor or a vendor product or suite or what have you. The question is the answers to that question are more broad than they have been in the past.
So overall, though, get away from the one throat to choke type model. Not necessarily the best one all the time.
I like what Ian had to say about it's like a core competency that you recognize about how you go about deploying solutions at your enterprise, and then you're looking for a good fit for that. Some people are, some enterprises are almost entirely, and you're getting that way with cloud a lot too. Like they don't want to deploy any software at all, right? They don't.
Yeah.
And so, but some will build their own if they had to. You see this a lot with banking.
True. Yep.
Like they're just way out in front of the trade room floor isn't going to wait for them.
So the way I think I'm hearing it, the more sophisticated the client is in the IAM space, but in this particular case, the more sophisticated they are, the more likely they are going to be able to pull off getting the point solution and integrating it and keeping it running in their environment as it expands, versus maybe a less sophisticated client might be better off having that one throat to choke because they're getting everything kind of centralized and, like I said, hitting the 80 or 90% rule. Is that fair?
I don't know if that's even fair, but if you commit to multiple products from one vendor, I mean, how much can you deploy in a calendar year, or whatever your time box is? There's only so much capacity, regardless of how many Nyedis consultants are on the floor with them. There's only so much you can do at once. So I'm sort of leaning more toward that laser focus. Okay, this is a real problem. I can fix this, and then tackle the next one.
So I've kept you guys here a long time. I really appreciate all your guys' time. So if there's anything that you guys like to say about any current conferences coming up or you're going to be at where we can meet and greet, shake hands, get some drinks together, or if there's something you want to tell people, like final words, we'll kind of go around the room. Mike, we'll start with you.
I just got back from a conference, Cyber Evolution, that's ours. I don't know if I'm going to go to it, but there are a couple. I think there's a Gartner conference at the end of the year, right? I don't know where the conferences are. You tell me. But no, I don't know. By the end of the year, that's going to be a bit tough. But certainly there's always EIC in Berlin, and that's in June, so I'll definitely be there for that. But hopefully, I'll be in New York. By the way, Ted, I should come see you guys. I'll be in New York the week of the 13th, attending a vendor conference. So it's the week of the 11th of December. So I'll be around, and if anybody wants to talk and take it further or whatever, I'll be there.
Awesome, definitely. Gerry?
Yeah, I'll probably hit some of the big ones into next year, like RSA, EIC, Denver's, the usual suspects there. I think Gartner Identity is not again until next December or something like that. They sort of skipped half a year. But otherwise, even later in December, there's still some local identity meetups happening. I've seen some emails, notifications about that. I'd say that's a really great place for folks to connect with their peers in their local environments, and usually pretty educational and fun to do those things. So that's what I would say.
Cool. And Ian, the man?
Well, I would say, look, if you can't make it out if there's no meetup in your area, if you can't make it to a conference, by the end of the year, join ID Pro. It's a great place to meet fellow practitioners, learn from their experiences. Even better, you want to go after your CID Pro, your certified identity professional, go for it. By the end of the year, that'll be great because it's a great thing to see on a resume. So that's what I'd say.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate this. This has been a ton of fun for me. Very nostalgic. Feel like we're going back in time. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the Nidus Anarchy podcast. For everyone else watching, we'll have all the links to everyone's profiles and all the fun stuff to them linked below. Feel free to leave comments, email, and you can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all the fun things. Nidus IAM. That's NYEDIS IAM. I will see you guys around. I'll see someone. We're going to do some Jaeger shots. So I'll see you guys. Get ready. Bye,
See ya.
everybody. Thanks.
See ya.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.